Is there any way to safely make use of this wonder supplement in light of the possibilities of its undesirable effects, the banning of over-the-counter sales in some countries, and medical experts raising still other concerns about side effects? Fortunately, there is. As previously stated, melatonin is a natural hormone that is made by every normal human being. We can learn strategies to increase the amount of melatonin that our bodies make. This will guarantee us improved supplies of pure, unadulterated melatonin in safe quantities. How to increase our melatonin levels? If a plant foreman desires to improve production on an assembly line, the likelihood of success will be increased if he is thoroughly acquainted with every aspect of the production process. Similarly, if we want to optimize our melatonin levels, we must understand how the body makes this vital hormone. Melatonin production occurs in the pineal gland, a tiny organ that is located in the exact center of the brain. This gland is only about the size of a kernel of corn and has the shape of a miniature pinnacone. As a testament to its importance, the pineal gland is the first gland to form during human fetal development. It is clearly distinguishable a mere 3 weeks after conception. It is important to note that the pineal gland is more than just a melatonin factory. At least 4 important compounds are secreted by this tiny gland. Epithalamin. Protein thought to increase learning capacity and slow down aging. Serotonin. Elevates mood and has influence on sleep and pain. Arginine bisotocin. Potent protein capable of rapidly inducing deep sleep. Melatonin. The fix and rejuvenate nighttime hormone. There are several steps in the chemical production of melatonin. The pineal gland draws tryptophan, an amino acid, from the blood. Tryptophan is converted to serotonin in the gland. Serotonin is converted to melatonin. An enzyme called NAT must be present for the final step. Without sufficient amounts of NAT, melatonin production suffers. Regulation of melatonin production. In spite of what may seem like a very straightforward chemical process, the body carefully regulates melatonin production. The process is largely controlled by the light-dark cycle. Optimal melatonin production only occurs at night and is dependent on a dark environment. Nighttime levels generally peak around 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. In those wee hours of the night, melatonin levels are 5 to 10 times higher than during the day. Light-dark signals are fed through the optical nerves to a control center in the brain where our body clock is located. This clock, in turn, tells the pineal gland not to produce melatonin. When the daylight signal is transmitted from the eyes is received by the control center, it triggers the gland to produce melatonin which is fed into the bloodstream. Animal tests indicate that melatonin can also be produced directly by the retina. Under conditions of darkness, this tissue on the back of the eye can act alone in producing melatonin. Melatonin is not stored in the pineal gland, it leaves the gland through simple diffusion. Its half-life is short during the initial few minutes, followed by a second longer phase. As a result, we cannot rely on yesterday's melatonin for today. We need a liberal supply of melatonin each evening. Boosting melatonin. Naturally. How can we now apply the understanding of the chemistry and regulation of melatonin in such a way as to increase the production of this vital hormone by our own bodies? That exposure to bright light early in the day. One of the first and highly respected studies probing the daylight-melatonin connection was published in 1988. Researchers in Finland found that rats who were exposed to natural daylight had significantly higher evening melatonin levels than another group of rats who had an equal amount of exposure to artificial light. Outdoor light is incredibly more intense than the artificial variety. Outdoor light can reach 3000 lux on a bright sunny day. A bright indoor environment may provide only 400 lux, less than 15% of that light brightness. There is an interesting observation regarding a special need for more sunlight as we get older. Consider these 3 facts. Melatonin appears to slow the aging process. The older we get, the less melatonin output we have. Natural light exposure in daytime increases melatonin output at night. We conclude that to slow the aging process, we can boost our melatonin output by being exposed to more sunlight, which helps to offset the natural weakening of melatonin production. Bright light, such as sunlight, also may increase serotonin production in the daytime, which can in turn prevent depression and fatigue. Avoid light exposure at night. Years ago there was recognition that evening light suppressed melatonin production in humans. It is important to avoid light exposure at night while maximizing it during the daytime hours. We know that low-intensity light, 50 lux, is not a problem, but levels of 500 lux and above at night significantly suppress melatonin release. Considering this information, it is prudent to minimize light exposure at night, and where light is necessary in the nighttime hours, use a light as dim as possible. In Western nations, the habit of staying up late at night is generally associated with significant amounts of light exposure during those hours. From the standpoint of melatonin production, it would be better to go to bed early to take advantage of the nighttime darkness and then rise early. Sleep is worth far more before than after midnight. 2 hours good sleep before midnight is worth more than 4 hours after midnight. Exercise boosts melatonin. An early study by Carr and colleagues looked at 7 healthy women. They demonstrated that 1 hour of exercise on a stationary bicycle could double or triple melatonin levels. Other studies have also demonstrated that physical exercise can boost melatonin levels. Eat foods rich in melatonin. Melatonin is present in many foods. Eating food rich in natural melatonin can raise melatonin levels in the bloodstream. Foods high in melatonin: barley, banana, tomatoes, ginger, rice, corn, oats. Eat food high in tryptophan. As we have observed, tryptophan is necessary for the pineal gland to make both serotonin and melatonin. Thus we would think that tryptophan is an important compound to ingest in abundance if we want to optimize our melatonin levels. Animal research has demonstrated indeed that increased amounts of L-tryptophan can cause a 4-fold rise in blood melatonin levels. Surprisingly, animals that had no pineal glands showed this same remarkable rise. This provides evidence of the intestine's ability to make melatonin from tryptophan. In medical school, I was told that milk is a rich source of tryptophan, but as you can see, many plant foods are much richer in this important amino acid. Vitamin B6 may increase melatonin levels. In animal studies, vitamin B6 appears to be necessary for the production of serotonin from tryptophan. Serotonin, you will recall, is a compound that the pineal uses to make melatonin. If humans also require B6 for serotonin production, then boosting intake of this vitamin will help to raise melatonin levels. Rich sources of vitamin B6. Food restriction and fasting boosts melatonin production. Restricted food intake in experimental animals has been found to produce a more youthful melatonin cycle and prolong lifespan. There may be a number of reasons for these advantageous effects. Animal tests show that there is actually a preservation of pineal function on a chronically Spartan diet. In one study, constant food restriction decreased the fall in melatonin and levels of the enzyme NAT that usually occurs with aging. By the end of the study, the rats who were allowed to eat as much as they wanted had levels of melatonin and NAT that were only half those of the sparsely fed rats. Both groups of rats, however, showed elevated levels of serotonin in their pineal glands. The implication of this research is that older animals lose their ability to effectively make melatonin due to falling levels of NAT, which is the critical enzyme needed to convert serotonin into melatonin. A sparse diet tends to preserve some of the loss of NAT function that occurs with aging. Not only is food restriction beneficial, but fasting itself seems to help preserve pineal function. Fasting actually lowers pineal production of melatonin, but increases melatonin in the daytime to levels usually seen only at night. The solution to this paradox hinges on the fact that fasting raises production of melatonin outside of the pineal gland. The key place where this happens is in specialized intestinal cells called the enterochromaffin cells. Habits that increase melatonin production. Increase exposure to natural light and minimize exposure to artificial light. Sleep in complete darkness. Eat foods rich in melatonin, tryptophan and vitamin B6. Avoid a calcium deficiency. Restrict food intake in general. Practice fasting, especially in evening hours. We have seen several dietary practices and other actions that can increase our body's production of melatonin in a natural way. Some habits will result in a lowering of melatonin production. Caffeine should be avoided, it stimulates the body's stress hormone system and tends to weaken melatonin production. It can cut melatonin production for 6 hours. Insomnia or disturbed sleep is usually the result. Probably the most common drug used in attempting to deal with stressful situations worldwide is alcohol. Alcohol, however, cannot be endorsed as a drug to improve a stressed person's melatonin supplies. Alcohol depresses melatonin levels. As little as 2 mixed drinks taken around 7 p.m. have been demonstrated to depress melatonin production even 5 or more hours later. Production of melatonin was down as much as 41% at midnight. Tobacco appears to be another melatonin depressor. Research indicates that smokers have lower evening melatonin levels than non-smokers. This may help to explain a well-known side effect of smoking. Sleep quality generally suffers. Melatonin production reduced by certain drug medications. Sympathetic nervous stimulation is essential for melatonin production. It can be impaired by a number of drug medications, even if the essential condition of nighttime darkness is provided. Certain medications reduce melatonin levels. The major tranquilizers haloperidol and chlorpromazine block the final step in the conversion of serotonin to melatonin. Beta blockers like propranolol and others have been demonstrated to markedly decrease melatonin levels. They block the key chemical messenger stimulation of the pineal at night. Other drugs can depress melatonin levels. Sleep aids including the benzodiazepines are problems in this regard. Psychiatric drugs including those that work by increasing serotonin levels can compromise melatonin production. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are commonly used to treat aches, pains, and inflammation. They have found their way into headache preparations, medications for premenstrual syndrome, and even cold and flu combinations. As little as 400 mg of the commonly used ibuprofen has been demonstrated to reduce pineal production of melatonin. The long-acting sustained release of indomethacin when taken in a dose of 75 mg at 6 p.m. was observed to completely prevent the rise in melatonin that occurs at night. Even excessive intake of B12 can interfere with melatonin production. One study documented depressed melatonin in connection with B12 intakes of 3 mg per day. Summing up, melatonin is a compound with incredible promise. We are just beginning, however, to learn about its side effects. The use of large amounts of melatonin supplements may in some cases pose significant harm. The most prudent approach seems to emphasize natural lifestyle approaches that boost levels of this remarkable hormone. To some this may sound too simple. It may even sound strangely reminiscent of those things our mothers and grandmothers emphasized. A healthy diet, regular physical exercise, regularity in sleeping, avoiding late-night activities, sunshine, etc. Despite the simplicity of these measures, medical research is demonstrating their effectiveness. However, there are some things that even mom and grandma did not recognize. The importance of foods high in tryptophan and melatonin, and the dangers of drugs once thought innocent. Our growing understanding of melatonin may, indeed, change the way we attempt to answer that oft-posted question, why am I so tired? When we struggle with personal fatigue issues, we may find ourselves running down a mental checklist of factors that affect melatonin levels. Such an approach is calculated to help the majority of people safely boost their energy levels, minimize fatigue, and experience a whole host of other benefits.